So grateful you're all here. Thank you so much for coming out today on this Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to everybody. So glad that you chose here to worship at this morning. We are so blessed. I mean, first of all, you saw a miracle this morning, okay? You witnessed a bona fide miracle. If you can get that many guys, no, hold on. If you could get that many guys clapping together. I said to Marcus, our resident soul man, I said, listen, you got to keep us on track here. You know, and he did. He did a good job. Anyways, that was awesome. Awesome job, guys. So when it comes to Father's Day in a lot of churches, it becomes beat 'em up Sunday. Beat the guys up, tell them all the lousy things they're doing and so forth and so on. And we have been very intentional here at PCF about not doing that. The principle in the Bible is to exhort and encourage. It's not as though we're not challenging one another. Like, one of the popular Bible verses about that is like iron sharpens iron, right? I mean, there needs to be some sharpening that takes place, but we shouldn't be trafficking in discouragement. Like that's not our job. Our job, that's the enemy's job, is to traffic, and that's not our job. Our job is to exhort and encourage. And so I want to do that with the dads here, the fathers here, the men here among us today. And so with that in mind, in an effort to exhort and encourage the dads, I'm calling what I feel led to share with you this morning, good decisions a dad should make. Good decisions a dad should make. Whether you look at the dads in the Bible or you look at dads today, sometimes I think we stained glass the characters in the Bible, like, we because they had encounters with God and met with God, so and so on, we tend to downplay decisions that they made that weren't the best ones. But whether you're talking about biblical fathers or whether you're talking about today fathers, what we do in life is a mixture of some good decisions and some not so good decisions, right? Right? Dads, right? And what I want to talk to us about this morning are some really, really, really good decisions you can make. And for my text, it's a bit of a character sketch this morning of a father who made some really good decisions. And those decisions that he made ended up saving a nation, saving an entire people group because of the decisions that he made. I want to talk to you about this father that was a father by choice. He was not a father by sexual desire or by some kind of biological thing that happened. He was a father by choice. There is, in fact, no mention of his wife ever in the Bible, but we know that he was married. We don't know if he had children of his own, but he definitely became a father by a decision that he made. Today I want to talk to you for a few minutes about a man named Mordecai. Mordecai. Now, his story is found in the book of Esther. And when people read the book of Esther, they it's called Esther, so it's about her, in part, her story. But none of that happened with Esther would have happened without Mordecai. You're going to see that Mordecai and the decisions he made were incredibly important. Mordecai was a man who lived some 500 years before Jesus came to earth. He lived as a minority in a secular place. His story, as I've already said, is found in the book of Esther. Now, I just want to give you a little bit of background to what's going on in the world at this moment, so the story has some depth to it and meaning to it. At this time in history, again, this is 500 years before Christ. At this time in history, the Jews had just finished 70 years of captivity in Babylon. At this moment, the Persians and the Chaldeans had overcome the Babylons and were now in charge of that part of the world. Strangely enough, when they came into power, they treated the Jews very kindly. And subsequently, they sent, you may have heard these Bible characters, Nehemiah, Ezra, Zerubbabel. They sent them from this region to go back to their homeland of Israel, and particularly Jerusalem, where their country had been left in shambles, to go back there and start a rebuilding effort, to start a restoration effort. They actually took their money, their country's money, and helped them with that project. But there were some, after living in Babylon, I'll say, after living in that region, in that area for so long, some Jews chose to remain in that area. And Mordecai was one of them, and other Jews as well. What you find in the book of Esther is the only account in the Bible of Jews who chose to remain. You know, sometimes I feel like that in New York State. While everybody's going for the red states, I feel like Mordecai living in Babylon here in New York. But when you look at this story, some awesome things happen through the life of Mordecai. Now, so it's the only book you can find it's some interesting insight about how God-fearing people found their way in a secular culture. You will also find in this book of Esther a riveting, suspense-filled story that is carefully sewn together. Interestingly, it's only one of two books in the Bible where God's name is never mentioned, the other one being the Song of Solomon. But what I want to tell you is in the book of Esther, while his name may not be written in the book, his fingerprints are on every page, which you're going to see in just a moment. The theme of the book of Esther is the providential or sovereign hand of God. Now, it may have been a while since you've thought about the book of Esther, if you've ever read it before, or you may be here today and not know the story of Esther at all. So I want to start by talking about some of the key characters in this real-life drama. As mentioned, Mordecai plays a pivotal part in this story. We don't know what he does for a living. It's quite likely that he was somehow a part of the leadership of that day in the country, in the nation somehow. And the reason we know that is it frequently talks about him meeting with other people at the city gate. That was the place, the city gates, where leaders came together to make decisions about their neighborhoods, right? So, again, we don't know a whole lot about him, but it's surmised that he was probably a leader. We know that he was Jewish. Mordecai was Jewish. And we know this. We know that he adopted and fathered his cousin. Her name, this is another important character in the story, her name is Hadassah. That was her Persian name, and it means dazzling beauty. Dazzling beauty. I haven't heard that name lately. Has anybody heard Hadassah? That one's got lost in history, right? What's your daughter's name? Hadassah. Oh, I haven't heard that. All right. Her Jewish name, that was her Persian name. Her Jewish name is Esther. She is so beautiful, Esther is so beautiful, that in our story that I'm going to tell you in just a moment, she ends up catching the eye of another key character in the story, King Xerxes. King Xerxes. King Xerxes was king over 127 different provinces, stretching all the way from India to Ethiopia. And it's important to note that he wasn't just viewed as like our president is, the leader of Persia, he was seen as a god, small g. In other words, what's that mean? It means whatever he says is law. Whatever he says is the way that it is. There's no coming up against him. It is what it is. It was not a democracy. Whatever King Xerxes said, that's the way it was. His wife's name was Queen Vesti. Queen Vesti, you'll hear more about her in just a second. And the final character's name that I want to mention right now, but I'm not going to talk about him until we get into the story, is a man by the name of Haman. Haman, Haman. Now, if you were to turn to the book of Esther and you would begin reading right at chapter 1, verse 1, you would find out that King Xerxes declared that there would be a 6-month-long party. I mean, these people were really into partying. So everybody was to party for 180 days. And during that time, the festivities were meant to display Xerxes' power and his wealth. Now, here's what's interesting. If you keep reading in the first few verses, you find out that after 180 days, they decide to extend it by another week. Another 7-day party at the end of 180 days of partying. Now, apparently, this 7-day party was a men's-only banquet. Only men were able to come to the one that was declared. But alongside that, as you read the story, you find that his wife, the Queen Vesti, also had a party for the ladies. Well, as Xerxes was going through his 7-day extended party, he decided that he would like Queen Vesti to come and be displayed for all the men to see. So he's asking his wife, he's asking for the queen to come and put on a little show for the men. Now, I'm just going to guess that she's not being asked to come for her intellect. Okay? Because in verse 11 it says, of Esther 1, it says, she was lovely to look at. So she was being invited to come and entertain the gentlemen. And here's what you need to know. She refused to go. The queen refused to obey the king's orders. Uh-oh. We have a problem. Through a series of decisions, it was decided that she should be removed from office as queen and never to present or to find herself in the king's presence again. And as they got together, the leaders got together, they were concerned that if this particular woman could go against the king's orders, what would prevent other women from going against orders, right? So they came up with this law. The law was, this is the rule, if you will, that went out. Every man should be the ruler over his own household. That's Esther 1:22. It was submission. It was a law requiring submission by legislation. Now, I know some of you men that are here today would kind of like to have that reinvoked or, put that forward again. But it's probably not the way to get a loving atmosphere in your home. So anyways, here we are. After all this, Queen Vesti is no longer queen, but that presented another problem. They needed, I guess, for the well-being of their society, the well-being of their nation, they needed both a king and a queen. So how are they going to get that? Is anybody old enough here to remember Ed McMahon? He used to be Johnny Carson's sidekick. Well, in the late 80s and 90s, he also hosted a television show called, anybody know? Oh boy, that was real popular. It actually lasted 6 or 7 years. It was called Star Search. Star Search. Star Search. Star Search. Yeah, Star Search. And, people would be tromped in there to see what they did as a talent or whatever. And then it's at some point, kind of like a early version of America's Got Talent, that kind of thing that's going on right now. So anyways, they decide that that's the best way for them to find a new queen. They're going to have all kind of a Cinderella moment. They're going to have all the maidens of the country come and kind of show themselves to the king, and then the king would get to decide. So as they go about doing this, who do you think catches the eye of King Xerxes? Esther does. Esther catches her eye, and we find out about her in chapter 2, verse 7. Listen to what it says. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah who had no father or mother. So Mordecai took care of her. Hadassah was also called Esther, and she had a very pretty figure and face. Mordecai had adopted her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. Which brings me to my first good decision a dad can make. And that is this, simply this: a father should choose to be a father. Now let me explain what I mean by that. A father should choose to be a father. Esther was not Mordecai's daughter by biological birth. Mordecai decided, he chose to be her father. Somehow in the great consequences of events, this little girl was without mother or father. Mordecai could have said, well, we don't know if he had any biological children, but he could have said, I got enough children now. Or he could have said, I'm not the greatest of fathers. Somebody else could do a better job. Or he could have said, why don't we send her to Jerusalem with the majority of the rest of the Jews so she can find a family to connect with there. But Mordecai made a decision to be her dad. Mordecai chose to be Esther's father. Fatherhood isn't a choice just at conception. It is a choice that men, dads, need to make every day. You choose to be a father. You may be a father, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about making the deliberate choice and taking on the responsibility of being a father. One of the best choices you could ever make is to choose to be a dad. There are a lot of decisions that go into being a father, but the first and most important decision is that you choose to be a dad. Right now, we are told in our nation, it is called, many of the children are called the fatherless children. Why? Because somewhere along the way, while dads may be enjoying the way to become a father, they're not choosing to be a dad going forward. Every day, all across the Americas, fathers drive home from work, and some make the decision to be a father, and some don't. One of the wisest ways you could use your drive home from work is to make the decision to once again, when you get home, adopt your children. Do you all understand what I'm talking about? I'm not talking about going to a lawyer and legally doing that. I'm talking about taking off your work hat and putting on your dad hat and choosing to be a father. I don't know. Maybe I got the wrong crowd this morning. I'll keep going. The story gets better here. To mentally go through the process of choosing to be a father. That's what Mordecai did. He chose to be a father to Esther. Okay, back to our story. In scene 1, a queen is moved off to the side. In scene 2, a queen is reinstalled into that place. Esther is now queen. In scene 3 of this drama, a plot is discovered. There are two people that Mordecai overhears near the gate where he was hanging out, plotting to overthrow the king, plotting to overthrow Xerxes. Listen to their names. I love their names. Actually, I've never ever heard of them before, except in this story. Two people, Bigthana and Teresh. It sounds like names from WWE or WWF or one of those. Bigthana. Actually, when I saw them in print, I'm like, man, there's got to be some special way to pronounce that. So I typed it into Google, pronounce Bigthana, pronounce Teresh. And you know how they get pronounced? Bigthana and Teresh. It's just plain right there. They are the villains. And Mordecai overhears their plot to try to overtake the king. He reports it to Esther. Remember, this daughter's queen now, right? He reports it to Esther. Esther tells the right people, and the plan is thwarted. They put it, it's out. Whatever plot to take the king or assassinate the king, it's ruined. It's ruined. And in Esther chapter 2, verse 23, listen, this is really important what I'm about to tell you. It says this, all this, meaning all that happened in this moment of thwarting the plot, all of this was written down in the daily court record in the king's presence. I'm not just telling you that. That's a Bible's verse. The writer of Esther felt necessary to tell us that the thwarting of this plot and who was involved, both the villains and Mordecai and Esther, write that down. Record that so we can remember it. The fact that Mordecai overheard the plot, told the right people, and the king's life was saved was written down for all to be able to read. Now that is very important. Someone might ask, well, what difference does it make that it got written down? You will see what a huge difference that made in just a moment. So that's scene 3. Scene 4, the villain of the story enters the picture. His name is Haman. Haman, if you don't know this already, is an arrogant bigot with a very, 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 very big ego. We don't know how he came to be in second command in all of Persia, but once he got there, he used this arrogant attitude to its hilt. For example, he set down I don't know if it was a law per se, but he made a requirement that any people who passed by Haman, or when Haman passed by them, they were called upon to bow. And it seems like everyone played along nicely with this, except one guy. Anybody guess his name? Mordecai. Mordecai refused to bow before Haman. Consequently, when Haman passed by and Mordecai didn't bow, Haman got ticked off, royally ticked off, I can say it that way, and decided that he wanted to see not only Mordecai snuffed out, not only his life taken out, but all the remaining Jewish people who were still in Persia. Which brings me to my second good decision that a dad can make. The second good decision a dad can make is decide to be a man or father of integrity. By integrity, I mean of godly character. Please note that what I just told you demonstrates that Mordecai was a man of integrity. Integrity has to do with being honest, yes. But integrity has to also do with having a strong sense, a fear of God in your life. A fear of God that is greater than your fear of people and your fear of the culture around you. Mordecai had that. Mordecai exhibited that by not bowing. Mordecai was not double-minded. He was not one person at one moment and a different person at the next. He was a whole individual. If you're acquainted with the book of Esther, you know that before the story is over, Esther is going to demonstrate courage that will save a nation. But I want to ask you this morning, Where do you think she got that courage? Where do you think she came upon that sense of integrity, that sense of character that enabled her to do what she did? You know, one of the things that I've come to discover is a lot of things are taught, but then there's other things that are caught. Some things we actually sit down and teach others about. But there's other things that somehow seem to get imputed to our lives just simply by living with people, by observing people, by doing life with people. Things kind of have a way of clinging on to us, right? It's that old adage or that old idea that, you know, there's a lot of our parents in each of us, right? Whether we want that or not. And maybe we could say for the good and some not so much for the good. There's just some things that get in us, not through a training moment or a teaching moment, but simply by soaking those things in. I want to say to us this morning, Esther's courage that she's about to demonstrate, I believe, was set in place by a father who took her under her wings and showed her what integrity looks like. You know, it's often been said that a crisis can develop character. But I want to tell you this morning, before a crisis could have the role of developing character in each one of us, the first thing that a crisis does is reveals character. You know, when you're put under a test, when the heat is turned up, what's in you comes out. Right? This is how it works. Now, the hope is if what I see coming out or decisions I make aren't the greatest decisions, that I will be alerted to that fact and use that test as a way for God to build character in me. But please know, before it's developed, it's revealed. Right? In those moments when something comes towards you or something comes at you and your response to that shows what's really down deep in your heart. Apparently, Esther caught some courage from Mordecai because the story from now on is a story of courage. At the beginning of scene 5, we know that Haman wants to kill Mordecai and all the Jewish people. And so that decision is made. Haman is actually able to convince Xerxes that it's necessary. And Xerxes says, and remember, he's not a president, he's king. Whatever he says, go. This is what he says. We're going to kill all those people. And so the Jewish people, they know that in essence their lives are over. Mordecai, in response to this, goes into a period of weeping and fasting. He begins to cry out to God for what's taking place in his world. And when Esther comes along, his daughter, now she's queen, when she comes along, she sees him weeping and fasting. And so she asks him, you know, what's happening? He tells her. And in the course of telling her, he says the most famous words from Esther. It's found in chapter 4, verse 14. Listen to what Mordecai says. You may have been chosen queen for such a time as this. Which brings me to my third good decision a dad can make. A dad should live with a sense of purpose. You need to choose to be a father. You need to choose to be a man or a person of integrity. But you need to choose to live with purpose. What do I mean by that? When we live in such a way with God's purposes marking our lives, our children have an opportunity to catch a sense of purpose for their lives. Mordecai knew that there was a time when this child's life would be used for a purpose. He's looking at the scenario that's being presented before him, and he's seeing that possibly God has set Esther in such a place for such a time as this. Maybe she can do something about this moment. Maybe God has orchestrated the events, me taking her under my wing, me choosing to be her father, and living my life with a sense of purpose. Maybe now God has so positioned her that God can use her to save our people. Living with a sense of purpose. Which begs me the question, dads, what are we living for? What is our greater purpose? You know, you can find your career, you can get a job, you can make money, you can get your wife and get a few kids. But listen, can I just tell all of us as dads here this morning, God has got even a bigger picture for you than that. Those are all good things. They're as American as apple pie. They're awesome. I'm not downgrading them at all. But I am saying beyond all of that, God has even a greater purpose for your life. Are we living that way? Are we living with that in mind? Or are we just going through the motions? You know, we're just coming, you know, you get up, you go to work, you you do whatever you do, you pay the bill, have a little fun somewhere along the way, wash, rinse, repeat, you know? I mean, or are we living our lives as dads and saying, you know, I know God's put me on planet Earth here for a reason, and I've got my eyes wide open to whatever it is He would be about in my life. You're living with the bigger picture in mind. You're not here by accident. When we live that way, our children have the opportunity to pick that up, to pick up that sense of purpose for their lives. What are we equipping them for? Are we helping them dream great dreams about God's kingdom? Are we challenging our children to think about great thoughts about God and His church? Are we equipping them for that time when they will be released? And then we back off and let the archer of the world control their destiny. That's what Mordecai did. I'm sure it wasn't easy for him to see Esther put into the situation that she was put into. But he understood there was quite likely a greater purpose behind it. Now, back to our story. Mordecai tells Esther about this edict of the king. And Esther knows something. She knows that she can't just walk in to Xerxes' throne room and spill the beans. She knows she can't do that. You know, in those times, in those days, different than it is now. My wife can approach me anytime she wants, say whatever she wants to me, right? She can do that. But in those times, the queen, even though it's his wife, the queen had to be invited into his presence. So she knows that if she goes in there and he doesn't give her the little dip of his scepter, quite likely she could end up having the same results as his first wife, Queen Vesti, did. So she tells her fellow Jews to go into a time of fasting and prayer. You know, if you don't know what to do, that's always a good thing to do. Just start praying, start fasting, go without some grub to try to hear and sense God's heart. So look in chapter 5 what happens. Chapter 5, verse 1 starts out saying this: on the third day, 3 days of fasting, on the third day, Esther puts on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's hall. That's Esther 5:1. What in essence is being said here is she puts on her nicest clothing. She puts on their best perfume. She looks good. Why do you think she's doing that? She's already been through this once, right? That's how she became queen. Why do you think she's putting on her best look for the king? So she can be invited into his presence. So it tells us there in this story that, she's in essence, she's come to the conclusion that the best way to Xerxes' brain is through his eyes. So she just stands in the doorway. She doesn't rush in making demands. She just stands there looking nice. And the Bible says, when Xerxes lifts up his eyes, he sees Queen Esther standing in the doorway and says, "A hubba, a hubba, a hubba." I wrote in my notes, that's a very loose translation of the Hebrew. What it actually says is, when he looked up, he was very pleased. He was pleased and said to Esther, "Come on in." So she goes in, and as they're talking, he says, "What is it that you would like?" And listen to how pleased he was. He said, "I am willing to give you up to half of my kingdom." Wow, he must have been a hubba, 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 hubba. So what'd she say? She says to King Xerxes, she says, "Listen, all I'm looking for, honey, is to have a little picnic with you. I just want to have a little picnic together." And she says, and besides the two of us, if we could invite Haman to come, that would be nice too. That's all I want. Just a little party, another party, just you and me and Haman. Now, I got to think that Xerxes got to be saying, "Haman? I don't know. That's not what I had in mind. I didn't have Haman being there in mind." So anyways, the party goes forward, the picnic that they had, and Esther's there, Haman's there, Xerxes there. And towards the end of this moment, he says to her, "Okay, so what do you want?" She says, I want to do this again tomorrow. I want to have another party, just the three of us tomorrow. So King Xerxes said, "All right, we'll do that again tomorrow." So Haman leaves that moment. You can read about this in Esther. Haman leaves that moment. He's so proud of himself that he's had dinner with the king and queen, that it went so well, he's coming back tomorrow. So he struts out of the throne room and he walks outside the palace, and all the people bow except Mordecai. He is royally ticked off, and he goes home, and he says to his wife, "Listen, I just had the greatest day of my life. I just had a private banquet with the king and his wife, and that stupid jerk Mordecai ruined the whole thing." So his friends and his wife say to him, "Listen, if that guy's such a pain in the neck to you, maybe you should put a pain in his neck." Said, "Build some gallows and build them tall. You can do it. You're the boss." Haman says, "That's a great idea." So before he goes to bed, he leaves instructions that gallows 75 feet tall be built right outside the castle. He goes to bed and he sleeps good, knowing that in the morning he's going to fix this Mordecai that's been a thorn in his flesh. As Haman's sleeping well, Xerxes is not sleeping so well. Xerxes just can't get to sleep. Wonder why. Had a nice picnic with his wife and his second in command, but he can't sleep. So in his insomnia, he says to the court officials, "Bring in those court records and have them read to me." Does anybody remember what's written in there? So the court records are brought in. I don't think he wants to read them because he's that interested in them. I think he was trying to find a way to get to sleep, and he thought, if I can have somebody read to me the most boring stuff ever, maybe I'll fall asleep. So the court official reads about the time in which two men, you know their names, Bigthana and Teresh, looked to take out his life. And as they're reading this to him, King Xerxes turns to the officials and said, have we ever done anything for that Mordecai guy? Have we done anything to honor him? Maybe give him an extra week off or give him a medal or anything. Have we done anything to honor him? And the officials say, no, we haven't done anything. And about that time, Haman shows up. And the king says to Haman, the second in command, he says to him, he asked him the question, what would you do for a wonderful guy? If you really wanted to honor a hero, someone has earned your loyalty and respect, what would you suggest that I do for him? Now, you know who Haman's thinking he's talking about. He's talking about him, right? So Haman responds to him and says, well, you could let him wear your robe. You could let him wear your crown and ride on the back of your horse. You could let him do all this, let him be led through the city streets and have all the people bow down and worship. I can just hear Haman saying this, thinking that he's prescribing what's going to happen for him. When he gets done talking, Xerxes says, that's a great idea. I think we're going to do that. I want you to go out, find Mordecai, and do everything you just described for him. Huh. He had to be thinking, ugh, that Mordecai. So he spends the morning chauffeuring Mordecai around. You can just imagine him being more angry and more angry every moment. And he was so frustrated in all this that he almost forgot about the banquet, the day 2 banquet, the picnic with the king and queen. The court officials come in saying, hey, you got to get to the banquet. So he gets to the banquet, they're already eating. He comes in and sits down, and pretty soon the king says to the queen again, what is it that I can do for you? What is it that you really want? And she says, well, I'll tell you, there's a man that's so villainous and evil that he wants to destroy all of my people. The king says, who is it? And she takes her pretty little finger and points it at Haman and says, it's this guy over here. The king, we are told in the story, is so angry that he stands up, doesn't know what to say, runs out of the room. Meanwhile, Haman, knowing that the gig is up, crouches before the queen and begins begging for mercy. And as he's in the process of doing that, the king comes back in the room and thinks that Haman's putting a hit on his wife. You know the story. The very gallows that were meant for Mordecai, Haman ends up hanging from. Mordecai is soon elevated to the place that Haman enjoyed. And I want to tell you, I want to make a couple points here at the end, but here's how I want to end this part. This is how the story ends. If you open your Bible, there's 10 chapters in the book of Esther. The 10th chapter is very short. And at the heading of that particular chapter, at least in my NIV Bible, it says this, the greatness of Mordecai. The book is about Esther, right? But the last chapter is labeled the greatness of Mordecai. Listen to what it says. Esther chapter 10, verse 3. Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all Jews. Can I just say to us this morning, this would not have ended like it did if Mordecai had not made some good decisions along the way. I know that Esther gets top billing in this story, and if we were here on Mother's Day, we could make a really good sermon about Esther. But today is about fathers, it's about men. And I just want to say to us, man to man, One of the best choices that we can make in life is to choose to be a father. Another great choice that we as men can make in life, a choice that has the potential of changing the destiny of a nation, is choosing to be a man of integrity. And finally, another great choice for us to make as dads is to live on purpose, to understand the greater God purpose for our lives, and to live in such a way. These are great decisions that Mordecai made, and they're great decisions a father can still make today. It will make an incredible impact upon your immediate family, and who knows the impact that it could have for an entire nation. I'm going to invite the dads to stand. I want to pray for you. I want to pray that God would anoint you and empower you in a much similar way that he did the father that we're talking about today. I want to encourage you as we leave here today to choose to be a good dad. I want to encourage you to choose to be a man of great character and to live for a purpose greater than the American dream. I want to encourage you to be a really good father. Lord, I thank you for the dads and the fathers among us today. I thank you for their lives. And Lord, like those fathers in the Bible, we all stand here today knowing we've made some good and some not so good decisions. Lord, we stand before you today with the knowledge and the understanding that there's some work yet to be done in our lives. It never seems to come to an end. But I am asking you, Father, to open up the gates of heaven over top of each and every one of us. And you would be a great shepherd to us and help us in the moment. It's easy to say right now, of course I want to choose to be a father. Of course I want to be a man of integrity. Of course I want to live for a purpose greater than myself. Of course, we all say that right now. It's when the moment arrives. Lord, help us as dads to choose those paths that would move things forward in a good way for our family, for our culture, and yes, Lord, even for this nation. Lord, help us to be good fathers. In Jesus' name I pray.